Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Shift. I'm Jackie Wins, and I'm here with my buddy, Jason Ray. What's going on today, Jason?
Not much. Excited to talk softball as always.
Absolutely. And what a weekend. I mean, there were a series across the states, right? Some really, really good ones, some lasting into what felt like forever in innings. So lots of extra softball, but a lot of really interesting results as well. As we head into our first topic, everybody, and for those who are back, welcome back. For those who are new timers, Jason and I go into a series of different topics in which we sort of delve into the past series of the weekend and just overall softball. So our first one is called State of the Diamond, in which we're going to talk about just what really happened this weekend. Where are we in the softball world after this weekend, and how do we sort of move forward? So, Jason, what do you see? What's going on?
So I think the big thing nationally was Florida actually taking 2 or 3 from Tennessee, right? And I think part of that was, and I know that we'll talk a little bit about this maybe a little bit later, but Florida actually was able to get to Pickens a little bit. They knocked her out of the game in the second game, and she started game 3. She was a little bit she was better there, but they still got her for a few runs. So I think just the level of invincibility, I should say, that that Pickens has, Nija has, and even Jordy to a certain degree right there. Right. So I think those things will be interesting as you continue to watch these series in the conference play to see, kind of to see what that looks like if those pitchers kind of start maintaining their dominance a little bit more, or if we see them getting hit a little bit. I mean, we've had this conversation, right? Like it's been with these specifically, like hitters have seen these ladies pitch for the last 4 years, right? This is fourth year for all of them because all of them played a lot or pitched a lot as a freshman, and then going to their senior year this year, right? So seeing them so many times, if there's an element of them getting figured out or whatever that looks like, right? So I think that was the big kind of the big takeaway for me. Alabama losing a game to Missouri, that was a little surprising. And Missouri is kind of one of those teams that has struggled early on in the year, but they're playing a lot of these teams pretty close early on in the conference season. So I think that's interesting. That was interesting to see as well. And then we've got some winning streaks going into this next week, right? UCLA, Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska, Washington, a lot of these teams. And of course, UCLA and Nebraska play this weekend. So one of those, but a lot of, as you kind of get out of some of these tournaments and get into conference play, some of these teams are dominating early on. So it'll be interesting as you watch and see if that trend continues to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like every number one was like unbeatable, and mostly because they had such a good ace, and because we talked last episode in terms of year of the hitter and things like that. Because we have such big batters, which we'll talk about later. Really good pitching, having that ace is crucial, right? So now that we're seeing some of these aces go down, it's sort of opening the door. And I think as fans, a lot of us who are in that top, 25, top 10 are starting to see a lot of opportunity that there really wasn't those first few weeks where you're like, oh, there's some dominance here. And where is my team? So, I totally agree with you in that aspect. One thing that I noticed is that there, while the parity is still there, I do feel like the consistency among teams, while we do have some beaten streaks, a lot of teams that we're not used to against certain series are dropping a few, like you mentioned with Alabama and Missouri, Oklahoma State with BYU. It's just very strange. But there was a conversation, and I know, and we go to the, love it. Okay. When we look at the Softball America world, I know that there were some people commenting the fact that, there are teams dropping games, but that when they had released their ranking and Oklahoma was still playing on Monday, the conversation among there was like, well, Oklahoma's already won this series, right? And they won it in a fashion, so we can understand where to rank them. And that's sort of the way it feels like it's going, right? Where, listen, if you win your series, you win your series, and that's where we're going in ranking. So it's just a different feel where it felt like when there wasn't as much parity, you were clinging on to every game. I feel like it's like back in the day when Oklahoma lost to Baylor and they were on their winning streak and, felt like the whole world collapsed. Where nowadays it would be like, okay, but they already won their series. So it's just a different focus than it used to be. But it's still exciting because I'm still watching that Monday night game, right? In which Oklahoma felt like it may have lost up until late in that game. So a different feel for our fans, sort of like what we mentioned last episode, but sort of exciting and keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things, I've seen this, just being asked, just generically speaking, year over year, but I think it's been asked more this year, what's going to win out, great hitting or great pitching? And I think this is the year that you're gonna find out, right? Specifically when you look at Oklahoma and UCLA, right? Like, and I think UCLA to a greater degree. UCLA struggled pitching. Even Tinsley has struggled, but beyond her, they've struggled in the circle. They have it over 4-team ERA at this point in the year, and so I think it'll be very intriguing to watch. Does the home run, does the power, does the scoring taper off in the postseason when the bullpens shrink a little bit? You see everybody's ace more often than you do now, or is it going to be the hitting that continues? So I think that's really going to be a good case study to watch because we all know that the scores continue to be high. Is that going to be something that continues? But I think you're right. Just kind of talking about some of those series, and I think from a ranking perspective, I think a lot of us look at it in terms of did they win the series versus did they lose the series? Not necessarily a sweep. Specifically when you're looking at teams that are playing in pretty close proximity in terms of talent wise, right? Now, when you look at like Alabama versus Missouri, I'm just going to throw that. I mean, you could say the same thing for Oklahoma and Ole Miss, but when there is a big disparity, when you're not playing a ranked team and you lose the game, maybe that holds a little bit more weight than what it would if like Arkansas and Florida or Oklahoma and Texas later on in the year when that happens. If you drop a game, it's not that big of a deal. But when you're an overwhelming favorite over another team and you drop a game, then that looks a little bit different.
Definitely. It would be remiss if I were to not mention the big happening here on X, what it feels like in the past 48 hours, which many have referred to now as Wavegate. And speaking to, one of LSU's pitchers waving, and then it turned into potentially multiple pitchers waving in regards to the South Carolina series, which was so interesting to me because I felt like, LSU has this way that they work, right? And I know there was the wave stuff going on with Edwards in terms of Texas A&M beforehand, and a lot of accusations that had started prior. But then they involved the clip of the South Carolina coach, right? Some assistant coach or somebody involved there who's sort of doing the wave thing. And it created this like mass, interaction event on X, and on my page, I proposed like, well, if it did start with a coach, why didn't the coaches talk, yada yada? But what I do think is interesting is that in the softball culture, you do have the dugouts that sort of chirp at each other, and you do have a little bit more of the flair that baseball is sort of starting, collegiate baseball is sort of starting to get, but it's more of a softball culture world. So now that we're seeing it on the mound, it feels different. Right. You saw batters slam their bats down, and that, K9 for Oklahoma explained, well, that's not really like towards the other team. It's like to pump up your team, but it's still flair. Right. And so I think that I thought that, it's interesting, that she's doing that. To me, it's like, as an Oklahoma fan, we see everything in terms of like pumping ourselves up and expression. So in a way, I feel hypocritical being critical of her, but it can also be seen as quite interesting, is the way I'll put it, from the other team's perspective and fans' perspective of like what is suitable in softball. And so, with alumni and everything like that around the NCAA sort of chirping in, it does set up for a really interesting, sparky weekend between Oklahoma and LSU, because both teams are really passionate in how they express. So what are your thoughts on that, Jason?
Yeah, I think for me, like whatever you need to do to like fire up your teammates and support each other, like I've never really necessarily had that big of a problem, and I've always thought it was just kind of silly for those that got so up in arms with when Oklahoma like slammed their bats and did all of that stuff. Like whatever you need to do to fire up your teammates and fire up your team and get them ready and show them that they have your back and you have their back and things like that. I mean, that's to your point that you made. It's part of softball culture. It's part of sports culture in general. So I've never really had a problem with that. And yeah, I think it'll be very intriguing to see what happens between LSU and Oklahoma. I will say Oklahoma seems very subdued in that area, more so than they have in the past, right? They don't have, I don't want to say they don't have anyone with big personalities, because that's definitely not the case, but they haven't done that, I think, to the level that, like a Jada Coleman or Riley Boone or some of those others that have done that. I mean, I think Abby Dayton, typically, she's the one that has the biggest fire of a lot of them, and then the rest of them are really seem to be pretty workmanlike in what they do. So it'll be very interesting to see if that ends up being one of those things, because as we talked about before, LSU's in sort of I wouldn't say that they're in a dire situation by any means, but they're in a spot where they desperately need to not get, at least not get swept, right? Like they need to be able to win 1 out of 3 in this, and obviously Oklahoma wants to be able to sweep this one as they continue, because the schedule is going to get more difficult. They've got LSU this weekend, but they got Texas and Arkansas looming over the next few weeks. So that'll be tougher. But and I think it kind of delves in another one of these situations where you've got LSU at they're like 3-6, 3-8, somewhere in that neighborhood. I can't remember off the top of my head in terms of the standings, but in South Carolina is there. So remember, if you are, no matter how good you were in the preseason, right, non-conference, and no matter how good you look like you're going to be in the conference season, you've got to finish above 500 to even be eligible for the NCAA tournament. So I think that's one thing that I'm going to be watching here, specifically with LSU, with South Carolina, with some of these others. Kentucky's another one. Like, are some of these teams even in danger of winning or of even making it to the NCAA tournament because of that reason?
Yeah, good point. I was wondering, sort of, I didn't look at the rest of their schedule. Clearly, I knew they were playing OU next. But I was wondering, the projection for LSU, South Carolina, and things like that as they move forward, because it is tough. The SEC this year, it feels like every year, but this year is tough. So if they're not able to steal a series or two away, I do question whether or not they'll be eligible. And in many ways, I hope they are, because I think they're great brands of softball. But it all depends on your fate and how the schedule falls, for sure. So we're going to move on to our next episode, our next topic. And it is, we talked about this a little bit, and I mentioned it just a second ago. You're the hitter. And sort of, we mentioned this now about 2 weeks ago, and now we're talking about it again. And so I wanted to say, so where is the status? Do we think this was an overreaction, or are we pretty certain here that this is definitely the year of the hitter?
I think it's very certain it's the year of the hitter, and I think it's showing. Even when you get into conference play, it's showing. I think Oklahoma. Obviously, we've talked about Oklahoma and the number of home runs they've hit, 129. They've got and this is just crazy to think about, Jackie. When there's Amanda Scarborough mentioned it on the broadcast, I believe. I don't know if it was the Auburn series or the Ole Miss series on Monday night, where she had mentioned. There's a decent chance when you talk about postseason that Oklahoma could hit 200 home runs through the rest of the season. Obviously, you would expect those numbers to go down when the when the opponents are stronger, right? But knowing the fact that you've got 129 right now, and you've probably got, when you talk about conference tournament, then you talk about regionals, super regionals, making it to the Women's College World Series if that happens. You've got 35 games left, maybe even close to 40 games left. And so, and Oklahoma's not the only team. UCLA is, they're not quite there, but they just hit 100, their 100th home run of the season there as well. So I think it's going to be crazy. You've got Florida at 71. You've got Texas Tech at 63. So I think the weird thing and the crazy thing to me is you're probably going to see, maybe Virginia Tech is at 55, just kind of looking at the stats here. You've got a good chance, Jackie, for at least 4 or 5 teams to eclipse the 100 home run mark. And I think we're going to see, I think Oklahoma and UCLA are both, obviously. I think I would be surprised if they both don't hit the 161 mark, which is the single season record for home runs. So, yeah, I don't think it's an overreaction. I think we're going to continue to see that, especially when you look at UCLA. The relative strength of the conference is not what the SEC is right now. I think this weekend against Nebraska will be very, very interesting to see with how good Nebraska has pitched this year, with not only Jordy but Alexa, their new freshman this year. How she's pitched as well. They've been doing really, really well in the circle. So I think it's interesting, and all the same things that we mentioned last time. They've pretty much anytime Patty's on, she gets asked about this, like what's your secret? How's your team doing this? And she has the same answer every time. She really credits their strength and conditioning. And we talked about that last week, or the last time we were on, is that's a big component of the power shift, is the strength and conditioning across the country, not just at Oklahoma and UCLA, but across the country. It is at a much different level than it ever has been before. And so this is going to allow teams to be able to catch up to the pitching a little bit.
Definitely. I think, the numbers are wild. And I know that a lot of people are like, well, they're going to slow down for Oklahoma. And I have to say, yes, I understand these aren't the strongest series that Oklahoma has been in. Willing to acknowledge that. But it's still impressive how many home runs are hitting against still an SEC Power 4, world. It is not only impressive, but it's unfathomable to think that, a team is going to potentially reach 200. It just, you need everybody to hit home runs, and they really are. So we'll see, what continues in that region. I want to give the shout outs to, Kendall Wells, and then to, of course, Grant from UCLA, in terms of individual performances. And listen, Kendall Wells had a hard time at the plate in one of the games. Was the last game, my mind's going, but in terms of figuring it out, and was able to pull through. But not only just pulls through with a hit, right? Pulls through with a fabulous home run that felt like it went on forever. And, it's a testament to that point as well, that now we have a freshman, right, who was performing at that level, right? Grant, give her flowers. She's a senior. Just incredible at any player to do this. But to think of Kendall Wells in terms of being able to get to this point, freshman year, it's wild. And I think there was potentially Chris Plank was talking about it on the air at one point. It's just unfathomable, because you come in here, yes, the strength and conditioning changes, things like that. But while she was hitting home runs, right, and travel ball and things like that, it wasn't to this rate. So when you do increase this aspect of conditioning, and you do have this, and you're open, and I think it's a testament to her, but a good lesson for softball players wide that are looking to play in college. When you're open to doing small adjustments to your coach's philosophy, and you buy in, that great things can happen. Sometimes I feel like I see players that they have the same swing, and they're not, you can tell the rest of the team is on this different philosophy and this other person's just sort of on an island. They just haven't bought in yet. And they're hacking and they're doing whatever. You can tell that these players, right, whether it be a freshman or a senior, have fully bought into the hitting philosophy. And it's a testament to them, but man, the results, it's incredible.
Yeah, no, and I think the thing that you mentioned that I wanted to hit on is the fact that Kendall Wells is doing this as a freshman. So, I mean, I think, number one, that's incredibly impressive for her to be doing this at this level. 25 home runs already. She's only 5 behind Jocelyn Allo for the single season record at Oklahoma, right, with the amount of games that we talked about that they have left a minute ago. And then the other thing is the fact that, yeah, she's doing this as a freshman, but it gives confidence to other kids knowing that, hey, I can come in as a freshman and play immediately and play at this level, right? Because it's not just her, this freshman class at Oklahoma. There's a lot of others that are performing at a high level. Obviously, she's sort of set the bar in terms of what that looks like. But yeah, no, I think there's an opportunity there for a lot of these other people coming in, having that confidence to say, hey, I can go compete and I can get on the field and I can put up numbers as a freshman. I don't have to be in a program for 2 or 3 years to be able to do that.
Definitely. It not only gives confidence to those players, but it allows them to understand that if you do truly perform like that, right? And I know that a lot of players come in, I can do this, I'm going to start, right? But they're not in the same philosophy and open-minded to being coached, right? If you are and you put that forward, like, there's no doubt their coach is going to put you in if you do this. So it's just something to keep in mind, because with all the boom of softball and to all of these young players that are coming out and thinking, I'm going to go D1, I'm going to play right away, it takes something special to do that. And especially at Oklahoma, where the depth is there, right? Yeah, we question circle depth, but in terms of like actual defensive depth, and at the plate, I mean, you have Lexi McDaniels trying to figure out how to get, into this lineup as much as possible, and she's hitting home runs. So, there's a lot of talent there, and the defensive, clearly batting talent is really growing. So it's going to be harder and harder to find that. So definitely small lessons for those who are all involved for sure. All right. Yeah. Shall we go on? Yeah. Here we go. All right. So the next one, we talked about this last time as well, thrivers versus non-thrivers. So, teams, we'll focus more so just overall in this past weekend and a little bit, the past few weekends. Basically, for those who are tuning in, it's not just, they're going to make the postseason, but more so what is their current state at the moment. So I'll start off with one. I thought that Florida was a thriver. One, because nobody really knew where Florida landed, and just total who they were playing. Their competition was, and their ability clearly with the Tennessee series to sort of show we can hang with number one. Really shot them, one, up the rankings, but two, made people believe. And that was part of the nice sort of spiel earlier on in this episode of the doors open. So that's one team for me.
Yeah, I think for me, of course, not just because they're the number one team in the country now for most people, but Texas. Texas has won a lot of games in a row. I mentioned they're leading the country. I think has the longest winning streak in the country, 26. And I mean, they just completely demolished Baylor. 2-run rule victories in back-to-back games over the weekend. So now their schedule, it probably admittedly hasn't been incredibly tough early on, right? But they'll have Texas A&M this weekend, so rivalry series. So that'll be intriguing to see, to kind of see how that goes. Tegan Cavan struggled a little bit early on in the season, but she's really found her groove now, pitching really kind of towards the level of where she was last year in the postseason. So it's going to be interesting to watch them and see how they continue to go. Just a couple others that I had just kind of under the radar. Duke is playing really well. They're right there in the hunt for the ACC, right there with Florida State and some others. And then Washington's another one. Washington, when Oklahoma played them, they looked a little bit like, hey, this is maybe not quite one of Heather Tarr's better teams, but they have played really well as of late. They've won 17 straight. They just swept Michigan over the weekend, and so I think the thought is you've probably got UCLA and you've got Nebraska right there in terms of those are the two teams that are going to challenge for the Big Ten championship. But Washington has a good opportunity. They've got, I believe it's Minnesota and Iowa, their next two series, so they have a really good opportunity to start Big Ten play at 15-0 before it gets a little bit tougher. But they're stacking up those wins and climbing up the rankings and potential seedings at least early on.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that is interesting is for me, Oklahoma State, while they won the series with BYU, they dropped that game, which is very interesting. But they've also had some, we'll call it turbulence recently. Oklahoma State, I'm putting them in my non-thrivers. You can't drop that game at with BYU. It just can't happen, especially when you've lost some of these series, right, with UCF and other things like that. Like you're just not at that point right now. And so, like, I get it. Ruby's playing well for them, things like that. But they need more. They need more from their bats. They need to get things going. They're leaving a lot of players on base. It just doesn't feel like it clicks for them, which then leads me to my next team. So Texas Tech is, and this is something, Jason, I'd like to hear your thoughts after I throw mine out there. But so Texas Tech is playing well. Clearly, they played really well this past weekend in terms of, winning their games and so on. They clearly recently have dropped a game. It causes, a lot of stir. So, but in terms of their RPI and strength of schedule, they're going to be well above clearly the 500 range and make postseason. But can we really identify whether they're thriving or non-thriving? Because yes, we understand there's a lot of controversy around the Florida State game, whatever, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day. They didn't play them. And while people were like, well, if they didn't play them, they still need to for their RPI, even if, they lost. The reality is they never got those games. So the seeding of Texas Tech will be interesting to me. And also, how they play against some of these teams, because to be fair, Naja has been challenged, right? Terry's thrown pretty decently well for them, but Naja has been challenged recently, and that is not saying that she is bad. I'm not saying any of that, so don't come at me, Texas Tech fans. I'm not, but she's just been challenged more. The dominance has just lightly felt like it's fell a little bit. Not that she's not winning and things like that, which opens many doors in people's minds. So I can't figure out like what side of the scale they are sort of falling in right now, because I don't really know how good they are. Is it an illusion? Clearly they're good in the circle, whatever, but I'm just not seeing 100% right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's really hard to tell. The Big 12 is not obviously not incredibly strong, right, from top to bottom, as strong as some of the other conferences that some of the other Power 4 conferences, I should say, right. So from top to bottom, you've got Arizona. They played probably the best two teams in the league already, right? So your point about strength of schedule will probably do nothing but go down for the most part. Their only opportunities for a top 25 RPI win the rest of the way are probably, I think, against Baylor and potentially Arizona State, and kind of depends on how they perform, right? So it's one of those things, Jackie, that I don't think we'll get an incredibly good gauge on until maybe postseason, maybe not even Big 12 postseason, maybe like super regional time, right? Because basically they'll be a decently seeded team. So yeah, I mean, and I think it'll be another good thing, another big thing to watch with them is, do they look like they're just kind of going through the motions against teams that they are just much more talented than, right? Like, for instance, they played Tarleton State in a midweek a couple of days ago. Now they won the game. They won the game 12-0, right? So it wasn't really that big of a deal. But then they've got Iowa. Just looking at their schedule, then they've got Iowa State, and then they've got Abilene Christian. Then they have another series with BYU. So just right. So they should be able to beat those teams in their sleep, right? But I think the other component of this that is interesting is they know their strength of schedule. They know, what that looks like. They know the relative strength or lack thereof of the Big 12. And so does that put a little bit more pressure on them to be perfect? Right? Do they feel like we can't lose? We can't lose a game. Like we can't drop a game to BYU, or we can't drop a game to Utah, or we can't drop a game to Baylor, or whatever that looks like. So yeah, it's interesting to watch because I can't imagine. I mean, if they lose another game the rest of the year, I mean, not to say that they won't, right? But because they've got Utah and Arizona State and Baylor, as I mentioned, so there's a potential that they drop one of those or drop one in the Big 12. But if you're looking at that, just to your point about what does this team look like from a seeding perspective in the NCAA tournament, this will be a perfect example. And I may have mentioned this a couple weeks ago when we last were on, but this is a perfect example of a team's metrics versus their eye test. When you look at this, they've got, I mean, when I just look at the stats, like fantastic, pop off the page, pitching, defense, hitting, they've got everything that you would look for. They've got depth in the circle. They can hit for home runs. They can steal bases. They can manufacture runs. They can do whatever needs to be done to be successful and win, right? But what does that draw look like? Because of their RPI and more so their strength of schedule, which impacts that RPI. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of an element of what Oklahoma has faced through the non-conference, right? I think the non-conference was much. Patty even admitted this on the in an interview that probably not as strong as we've had in the past, right? So, understanding you want to be challenged, you want to have your backs to the wall, and they faced that against Arizona. But I think if you're a Texas Tech fan, you've got to like how your team responded from that. Now, it was unfathomable to watch a team as good as Texas Tech not only be shut out but be run ruled at home, right, to Arizona. But the way that they rebounded off of that was, I think, good to see that they came back and they run ruled Arizona in back-to-back games. But yeah, I mean, there's something to teams like that just really need to be challenged and like to be challenged. And if they're not, I mean, it'll be if they lose interest, so to speak, in some of these games. So that'll be big to watch because they are clearly the best team in the Big 12. And it's, they did lose to Arizona that one game. So I don't know that I could say it's not necessarily close, but when they're playing anywhere near their best, like there's not another team that's on their, kind of in their radar.
And I was going to mention, Oklahoma went through a similar type of treatment, right? And this has been talked about a bunch, so I won't go too deep into it. But teams have to be willing to play you, and whatever people's thoughts are on Texas Tech, it does impact who wants to play you. If they feel like you're unbeatable, or remember Patty had those allegations of cheating forever, where coaches wouldn't even talk to her and as she was utilizing the portal quite nifty ways and reading the rule book. Texas Tech does it their way and gets similar treatment. So it's hard for them, and I get it, but man, they really can't afford that type of run rule. It just, when I saw that, I went, oof, because now teams got confidence. You don't want to give teams confidence. And then it makes you question. The committee can say, well, oh, but look what happened. They went through some adversity and they got annihilated. So, it's just something to sort of think about. But we shall move on. So this one, we did have last week. It was an RPI breakdown. So if you are still wondering what in the world RPI is, or if you're new and sort of just joining, from the stands and trying to get onto the softball world as a newbie, as we like to say, feel free to go to the last episode because Jason did a fabulous job in terms of breaking down RPI and really explaining what goes into it. So this week we're going to look at, there was the first sort of output from the media sites. I believe D1 and Softball America put out some bracketology. in some fashion, or let me say this is not final, and it moves. So for those who are new, we're not saying this is basically what's going to happen. It's just a little bit of a projection. So bracketology, Jason, take it away.
Yeah, so I think part of that is just to Jackie's point. This ebbs and flows on a weekly basis. It honestly, as you get in deeper into conference play, like it updates and it changes on a daily basis, right? So some of the big things that we talked about this a little bit, but just as a recap, some of the big things that the committee looks at is they look at your top 10 wins that you've had. They look at top 25 wins and any bad losses. So really a bad loss is considered anyone outside of the top 100 RPI, right? So you can counteract that, and I know our people that are listening are probably more near and dear to the Oklahoma heart. So just using them as an example, right? They do have a bad loss. This is one of the only years that they've had a bad loss. Long Beach State, that they lost that game. And Long Beach State currently sits outside of the top 100. Now there is an opportunity for them in their conference to get back up, and Oklahoma fans would love to see that. But most people have Oklahoma probably in the 3 to 4 range, like from a bracketology perspective, and I think that's a good spot for them, right? Because they on one end, and that's kind of the differentiating factor on this when you do some of these projections is you look at what is weighted more by the committee. Oklahoma has 10, I believe, 10 top 25 wins, which is second most in the nation, tied with second most in the nation behind Texas. Texas has 11. So, on one end, but then you've got the bad loss. Now, from an Oklahoma perspective, if you get into a situation where, hey, Long Beach State starts winning some games, then that makes that differentiation look a little bit better, right? So I think that's, if you're an Oklahoma fan, now it gets to the when you start rooting for some of these teams that you beat to continue to win. Like Oklahoma wants Arizona to continue to win. Oklahoma wants Arizona State to continue to win. Obviously Long Beach State and things like that. So that's a big one when you look at it. I mean, we talked about most people have Texas Tech in the 7 to 8 range, right? When you look at the talent, like we talked about, when you look at the talent alone, the eye test, like this is a number 1 or number 2 seed, right? Like this is where they're at. They're ranked number 2 in most polls this week, right? But as we talked about, the RPI, the lack of top 25 wins, the strength of schedule, which will do nothing but go down. And you talked about this. I just wanted to make one little point on this. Maybe it was poor planning on Texas Tech's part for that Florida State game, right? Maybe they could have planned ahead a little bit, but by no means did they dodge that game, right? This was critical for them, even if they lost the game, right? Even if they lost the game to Florida State, to be able to play that, to have a top 10 team, on your resume, top 10 win potentially on your resume. So they desperately needed that one. So, but yeah, I think some of the other ones that are interesting is Nebraska. Right now, they position themselves into a top 5 overall seed, based on their schedule. They challenged themselves early on. They've got 2 of the best wins in the country, with wins over Texas Tech and Texas, right? So those 2 wins are going to continue to carry them further. Now, let's see what this looks like between them and UCLA this weekend. This is another really good opportunity, probably a better opportunity for UCLA. UCLA is probably hovering in that 7 to 9 range as well. But this will be interesting to watch. I think the one thing, as we kind of look at bracketology and where some of these seeds and project where some of these teams will be, I think when you look at it, I've said I think you've got about 7 or 8 teams, and I don't know if this has ever been the case, but I think you've got about 7 or 8 teams that legitimately have a legitimate chance at winning a national championship, right? I mean, you can see Texas, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Florida, UCLA. Like a lot of these teams, Nebraska, have a good opportunity. Now, when you get past like number 10, right, when you're looking at teams like I'll just kind of rattle some of these off when you're looking at like Georgia, Mississippi State, Oregon, like Texas A&M. Let's see, just some of the others. Virginia Tech, Clemson. Not necessarily Florida. Florida State's a little bit sort of kind of in between those for me, whether they can win a championship or whether they're a team that could lose in the first round. So I say that to say that I think it's going to be interesting as we kind of fast forward to regional time. These teams that are seeded like really 11 through 16, I think we may see more upsets than we've ever seen in the regional play, just because we have a lot of mid-major. We have teams that are seeded 1 through 32 this year for the first time, so you'll get more true seed versus typically what we've seen is more like geography based. Now, don't get me wrong, geography is still going to be a component to this, right? But you'll still get you'll get more true seeding, but it'll be very interesting to look and see. Do we see for the first time? Do we see some of these teams get upset in regional play? Like, for example, we've got like Virginia Tech in one of these bracketologies is the 14th seed. Well, they have LSU in their region, right? That would be, that's a good matchup. Oklahoma State will go to Mississippi State in one of these projections, right? Well, that would be interesting, and you could see the potential. You could see the potential for that. Clemson as a host playing Auburn, right? And even Purdue in that one. So Georgia playing Duke, like some of these things, you could see that the competitiveness in some of these regionals might be at a little bit higher level than we've seen in the past. So that's exciting to see for the sport, I think.
Absolutely. And just for the viewers, who because we do have some OU fan base here, so who would OU be sort of seeing what's projected?
So from a projection perspective, let's look here. So the projection had Arizona State, Loyola Marymount, and Howard. So
we see our friends again.
Yeah, I think we'll probably see a Big 12 team go to Norman. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of what it was. Either a Big 12 or a Big 10 team probably go to Norman. So that would be a good matchup. Arizona State's sneaky good. They're Kenzie Brown has struggled a little bit. They're ace in the circle, and they had played some. By the way, if you guys didn't watch the Arizona State-Arizona series this weekend, was wild. Every game was wild. Like the first game, Arizona State got up to like a 10-0, 11-0 lead after 2 innings, and then Arizona came back a little bit. In the second game, Arizona got up to like an 8-0 lead, and Arizona State came back and took the. It was really interesting to watch. But yeah, Arizona State's a much improved team now. If Kenzie Brown can get back to the kind of the form that she was last year, then they can make some noise, whether they play in the Oklahoma Norman Regional or where they end up playing. But it's exciting. It's weird, Jackie. We're about 5 weeks away from conference tournament time. Like it's happened. It's going so fast. So there's still about 5 weeks left of conference play and series like that, but it'll be here before we know it.
Absolutely. And it's wild to think that we were just talking about, this is the start of the season, things like that. But to your point about Kenzie Brown, listen, she basically almost shut out Oklahoma in terms of when, it was the first game of the season, but besides the point, pitched real well there. But we were not prepared for that at all until later on in that game. But so there's a lot of talent there that'd be wild at Norman. But all around, to the viewers, it's going to change, as Jason said, every weekend. So as it goes up and down, that's the fun of bracketology. So we always do. The idea from the stands is that we start here and you go elsewhere too. So we don't do bracketology because that is a wild world that we do not get into voluntarily. But the pay sites do provide that. So if you're looking for one, they do a nice one over there at Softball America. D1 does one. So any type of major softball site has been started. Some sites beyond those two may not have started just because it's so early. They may not have the staffing for that. But it is another reason to join one of those sites. Yes, it does cost a little bit of money, which we understand, but you do get your content worth. So, just something to keep in mind there, and sort of understand, because as you get closer and closer, that's really what we're looking to, does this team need to win this weekend and sweep? Because, based on where they could potentially be projected. But also note that these bracketologists, they're all, just forecasting. The NCAA committee really has to make the final decision. And let me tell you, that's not easy, because you can't track certain years. The eye test has a little bit more influence. Sometimes RPI is, the word of it all. So different factors play at different times. It's the fun of it is to see who was mostly correct. But as like in football, when they do that type of stuff, this is at the softball world type. But overall, well done, Jason. What? Thanks for doing that, as always. Not only our stats guy, but also now our bracketology guy, because I told Jason before this, I was like, you got this, man, because bracketology is just a wild world to me. It fascinates me, but I never get into those weeds. So, thanks for doing that, Jason. Appreciate it. So everyone, we are going to try and stay on pace. Clearly, life happens again from the stands. Its biggest and best thing about it is that we created this from our fandom and our place of just loving softball to create content that is free for you all. Okay. So please feel free to subscribe to the Patreon to do everything, on X and so on, and contribute. And remember that all the contributors to From the Stands have their own accounts, and make sure you follow all those contributors as well, because during the weekends we really post mostly from our own places, and then to the Patreon, whether it be via video or articles by our content creators overall. Okay, so first and foremost, thanks, Jason, for joining me today, as always, as my co-host here for From the Stands and the Shift. And everybody, here we go into another wild weekend of softball. We'll catch you later, and next week on the Shift. See ya.